Valve's Steam machine seems to have taken the world by storm. You get the big picture experience right in your living room, no need for even a mouse and keyboard. But what if I told you that this was done 20 years ago, longer than that even, by a company producing gaming cube computers that ran Windows XP? Oh, and you also didn't need a mouse and keyboard with them either. Right, so step one of any of this is of course going to be the hardware, and I've picked up what is meant to be one of the gaming Shuttle PCs which ticks all the boxes. It was essentially a cube that played games. It's also a full computer and came out during the Windows XP era. I can't remember how much this cost me, but I did grab it off an eBay auction or something along those lines, and it just got me thinking it's going to be a great video, but there's going to be multiple parts to this, and part one is going to be the hardware. And let's take a look at what we've got. Now, it's in by no means pristine condition, but I think you can already see what I mean about the form factor. This is a whole computer, it's the Glamour XPC Shuttle, and it's just a cube. It is straight up a cube. It is almost literally a Steam machine already. In fact, in terms of specifications, and let's get this open and double check, but this, despite its Windows XP origins and form factor, actually comes with surround sound output and a full dedicated graphics card. That's right, that's a full PCIe slot graphics card on here, and it's even got HDMI and VGA out on the motherboard itself. But why don't we take a quick look inside and see what's actually going on with this, because it should be decently powerful given the age of the hardware. No need for a teardown guide. And that's it. That's all you have to do. I mean, it could certainly use a little bit of a clean, but at the same time we've got an XFX graphics card, actually rather nice, 7600 GT, so 7600 GT from Nvidia. We actually have a top-mounted DVD drive, 2 gigs of RAM, which is not bad given that we're seeing PCs with just 8 gigs of RAM in them because of prices. Round the back here, we do actually have a decent power supply. I mean, it's only doing 16 amps on the 12-volt rail. Given the size of this, that's actually quite a decent chunk of power. The funky round IDE cables, and you can just about make out at the back down there, is our CPU cooler, which has got 2 heat pipes going for the CPU cooler, and under there will be our processor. But rather than tearing this all down immediately, why don't we plug this in and just double check this is actually working? I mean, it looks rather substantial, doesn't it? That is a proper gaming machine. For what is Windows XP era hardware, you are getting something that is small, compact, and will actually do some serious gaming. Push the on button. Oh, there we go. It did pop up. It's an N4 638 chipset running an Athlon 64X2 5600 Plus, so 2 cores at, about 2.4 GHz? A decent amount of options. It can boot from removable media. Why does it have overclocking? Oh, abandon all data. Easy test. We can see if this works. Yes, we're going to have to tear this down to clean it and change the thermal paste. I was going to say, I remember these being really easy to take apart, and it is literally 2 screws to access everything. The warranty sticker down here has been removed, so someone's cared for this. Someone has actually been in here. Oh, and the cooler is mounted in with that thumb screws for maintenance. That's actually good. We didn't have to touch any of that. That thermal paste is fine. So I wasn't going to cover the graphics card in any great capacity because I was just going to give it a quick clean, but what's going on here? Unless someone's actively gone to the effort of repairing this, that's dead cool. Still going to change the thermal paste. So this is all now cleaned and refurbished. I've gone through and cleaned up the motherboard, the processor, new thermal paste, no dust, and even done the graphics card, which was weirding me out a little bit with those strange cables because tracing them back, they aren't seeming to be doing much beyond changing things around on the display of the bottom DVI port. And that's either XFX is doing, who made the card, or Shuttle. And the only reasoning I could think of for Shuttle to do it is to improve display compatibility on old CRT TVs, because theoretically you can display them over DVI. So given they've only got a European number, what I am going to do is actually send them an email and see if they get back to us, and if they do, I will certainly cut in with what they say, because I don't know what that's there for. Right, so I did actually hear back from Shuttle, which was amazing given their customer support is based in Germany, and this is almost a 21-year-old computer, but no, they are fully willing to support this and actually give me some advice. Now, after a bit of back and forth, we did end up agreeing that it seems to be along the lines of what I was already thinking. It's either for PAL modifications for the internal clock to make sure it works on CRTs better, or it's been there to bypass the internal clock for overclocking. Either way, as he put it, it looks too fancy to be a repair bypass for something internal. So yeah, it could be a very rare mod from one of the modders of the past, or it could just be a unique sample. But anyway, big shout out to Shuttle support, who were willing to actually advise on something that actually was nothing to do with them. This 7600 is to do with the previous owner. Nothing to do with Shuttle, but they were more than happy to chime in with their thoughts, so big thank you to them for that. But anyway, this brings us now to part 2 of the video. So part 2, the software. And this is where things are going to get a little bit trickier. See, this thing is designed to run either Windows Vista or Windows XP, with a lot of people opting for Windows XP on them because, of course, look at the reputation Windows Vista had. But for a device 20 years ago, we are asking it to do essentially what the Steam machine does. We want it to boot to an interface where it can run games and all be controlled with a controller, which was doable back in the day, and some people did actually do it, essentially treating this a bit like a souped up Xbox in a sense. And we're going to be using Windows XP. That flops down to be a floppy drive. Does this flop up? Yes. Next of all, we should have our operating system on here. I did plonk an SSD in here to install, and I'm guessing that one had, oh no. This is the first time we've seen it try and load Windows, and, yeah, it's certainly artifacting, that's for sure. Okay, well, it can run Windows 10 if you want, actually, really quickly. Look at that artifacting. Is it just the display? I think this graphics card might be on the way out. We're gonna have to return back to part 1. To now fix the graphics card issue that we hadn't actually noticed. I'm wondering if maybe we can just reseat it, but we wouldn't have noticed because it doesn't do it in the BIOS, it only does it when it's having to display Windows. Unless this is a common fault and this board has been put here to try and fix display issues, but no, it goes to just the bottom port and we get artifacting on both. I think the memory is just cooked, if not the core itself, to be honest. I think the fan's broken, I think that's what's happened. Look, the fan is just the bearing, the motor is just gone. Let's see if I've got anything spare that could replace that, because I think the damage is already done. We've been testing it, the previous seller's probably testing it, but it would be a cool use for it actually. So I've gone through and I've found some low power turds. We've got a 4350 Silent, I've got a 6670, which to be fair is newer, actually not as awful, but is probably too powerful for the system. It's not really a Windows XP graphics card. And then, on the theme of keeping it an Nvidia card, I actually do have this rather cool GT430. It's an OEM one that's a bit souped up. If it doesn't work, we do have some AMD options, but I think for now, we're just going to swap it out. Yeah, putting Fermi in a case like this seems like a good idea, doesn't it? So from the looks of things, at least getting to this point, I'll take it apart while this installs. Not the end of the world, but it's not looking pretty. This still artifacts. I have gone back and tested it, and yeah, unfortunately, where that fan just wasn't working, I'd imagine the seller of this was probably using it for a while, I was using it for a while, and with the form factor, we just had no idea this was constantly cooking itself. But anyway, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to set up the drivers, the boring bits and pieces, get everything all working, and then the next job after that is to make this actually work like a Steam machine. Because how are we going to do that? At the moment, it is just Windows XP. I mean, it does the basics. It can do some basic games, it can do basic media player tasks. So step 1, I think, is we need to get Windows XP all working, get it all set up and actually get a proof of concept, and then comes the tricky part, where we need this to work with a controller, and we also need it to work with a front end, and also run games. Which, of course, this was able to do back in the day, but that was a long time ago. Next of all, we should be here with a working version of Windows XP. So I've gone through the system, I've got drivers on here, I've got some extra programs, we've got games, we've even got Steam, which does actually sort of work. So we've actually got a complete setup, but it's not really a Steam machine, is it? I mean, this is just clearly just a Windows XP computer. It works well, I mean, you can go to the internet. There you go, you're on Wikipedia. It'll do things like that. It can do the internet, it can do a bit of browsing. You want to launch a game? Then yeah, it can launch a game. I mean, even if you want to launch something relatively modern for XP terms like GTA 4, because we've got Steam able to run in the background as DRM, you can play GTA 4. It'll load up, it's just a basic older version of the game, but we can actually get games running on here. So it can do the programs, it can do the web browsing, it can do the games. But our next job is to make this more of an actual Steam machine, because as it stands, I haven't even put the case panels back on. Keen-eyed viewers have already noticed though, what? The 7600 GT is back? Yes, I have painstakingly gone through, melted the chip back into a state where it's working, repaired the cooler to the stage where this fan, I've even put the original logo on it. So, yep, that is a new fan installed, which was it's slightly larger than the original. Please, there we go. It does carry on working. That was completely broken. But after hearing from Shuttle themselves that this might be something a little bit special, it wasn't something they added, then I thought, you know what? I'm going to keep it as original as possible and get that working again. And so far, this actually is still working. But anyway, I've also whacked a drive on top just to install programs from for ease of use. It's easier to do it over SATA than it is USB. But our next job is to sort out some sort of front end. And I've got a couple of ideas. So we're going to be trying to use XBMC, which should act as a front end. It's going to be a little bit tricky to get the programs running through it, but we can at least get Windows to boot to it. There we go, we get our specs through, 800 by 600, all powered by the 7600 GT. The only thing is though, we're going to have to try and track down the old files to make this look the way it should have looked. And of course, it can't use the old Media Center zip because this does not have the correct file structure. But it does. So before the end of the day, I do want to have some sort of working proof of concept. Just something that Windows will boot to, and we can control easily without it just being Windows. This is proving much harder in the modern day than it was back when this was new, because no one is supporting anything to do with this anymore. Which is fair enough, why would you? You let it extract files, it'll use an entire core to do it, but it does it really fast. So after enough time spent faffing around and trying to get older and newer versions of skins and going through Python scripts and all of this nonsense, here you have it. It is one of the old skins designed to look like blades, because I thought, you know what, that's gamery and kind of the XP era, that 2005, end of the original Xbox, beginning of the Xbox 360 kind of style. Not exactly the most up-to-date. I've definitely got a couple more bugs to go through and fix, but this now updates along the bottom, and it's only going to take a few little bits to be able to get it to load into games. So my next step is to figure out, 1, how to make this become a games launcher, and 2, set up controller support. Could take a hot minute, given how long this has taken, but look how cool this is. I mean, if we ignore that this thing's in pieces, it's almost resembling a 20-year-old Steam machine that runs Windows XP. It's pretty cool, actually. I'm pretty happy with that. It's taken far longer than I would have liked because it's already 20 to 5. That's a whole day spent on this. But the next step, before we even start adding games, is going to be getting it to work on with a controller. Now, fortunately, the original Xbox does sort of actually work on Windows XP because this connector, you know, this sort of breakaway cable, is actually just USB 1.1. Fortunately, in the world of 2026, we haven't got to do any soldering. I've been there, I've done that, but this is a lot easier. We take our Xbox controller, we connect this up, suddenly it has a USB port, because one of the crucial things with a Steam machine is you can control it with a controller. Now, I don't think if we plug this in, it'll do anything. No, so you can't actually control anything. You will get the driver installer pop up though, so let's see. Device refresh. Well, let's go for a restart real quick and see if that fixes things. XBCD Xbox controller. This device is working. Yes, okay, so it is detected. After a little bit of tinkering around, we do actually now have the controller detected. As you can see, all the buttons are working and are responding. It's not doing anything at the moment, but maybe we need to set this up. Right, so in terms of being able to control the front end, it is going to be doable, but we are going to have to do it manually by setting this up as a direct input controller, because this is before X input or anything like that existed. So we want to get it as smooth to use where if you want to use a keyboard, you can use a keyboard. If you want to use a controller, you can use a controller. And this is why the software side, which is also peripherals at this point, is a monumental pain. So if we go through the log, we can see that it does recognize it as joystick XBCD PowerWave 360 shape. So I'm thinking we bodge this by taking this name here, XBCD PowerWave 360 shape, because it thinks it's some sort of generic 360 controller, and we just modify the joystick name so it's looking for something else. A works. We have proof of... so long to have a working A button and a working B button, but we don't have anything else. So we're probably going to need to modify some aspects of this. Can we just do a replace command? And then if we replace all, it still only works like that. Okay. Progress. Right, so after a lot of time spent on this, we do actually now have a proof of concept. So it's much easier to get it set up with in games than it is to get it set up with in, say, actual programs. But I mean, you jump into anything like Half-Life 2, and yeah, I mean, we've got a Windows XP computer from 20 years ago playing Half-Life 2 with seemingly no problems. Yeah, I can do my usual benchmarking bit here, and it isn't slowing down. I mean, that's pretty good going for the computer from a hardware perspective, but more importantly, I'm doing all of this with a controller. Yeah, it's not the smoothest experience in the world, but it does work. In fact, Half-Life 2 is probably a great example because it does actually support direct input really well. I mean, it supports X input better, but hey, we're getting through this section here, and I've just got this set up to work pretty much like an original Xbox controller would have done in the original Xbox port. So I can't really argue with it too much. Yeah, this is working fine. But more importantly, if we actually have our front end here, which is of course running in debug mode because that's how I've been setting all of this up, as you can see, it works perfectly. We've got file manager, go through our files if we really want, it's responsive, and all of this works, even thumbsticks. So you could have been there back 20 years ago, just controlling your telly like this. Now we have to make it so we can actually launch games from this, and just have it be what it boots to, which is going to be fun. One thing I will say about this channel is that no project is ever as straightforward as it seems, but as you can see, I'm so confident this is going to work that what should happen is, when we turn this on, we will get a very Windows XP Steam Machine-like experience, because the only thing plugged in is a controller and a monitor. So, by all accounts, when we push on, we get the operating system, because of course this is the Windows XP Steam Machine, and then as soon as it gets past that, I've replaced all the shell files through regedit. Here we are. This is the experience. So we should now be able to use our controller, sign in. We get things like the weather, which of course isn't updating because this software is very old, despite the fact it's claiming it has just done it. We've got our media, we get our bits and pieces of information, we've got our volume controls all working, but the main thing is gaming. So all of this setup lets you easily access any of the media you want, but also, as you can see here, these are all installed. So by all accounts, we can push A on any of these and they will just work. So we've got Counter-Strike 16, Crisis. Towards some points, I was giving up with making artwork for this, so we've ended up with Comic Sans Splinter Cell. But all of these will launch and play if I just push A on the controller. So once again, so we can actually save some bits for the gaming section, if I push A on Half-Life 2, okay, I have launched 3 instances of the game, but that's not a problem. We can get through those because I've got controller support. See, it didn't tab us out. That did work. This has been so difficult to do. And we've gone in-game by only using the controller, which is a little bit more fiddly than I would like. All of our configs. Okay, we are continuously moving. Okay, there's a few problems to iron out. There we go. Okay, we were permanently moving to the right for a second, but we've already seen a little bit of Half-Life 2, but you get the general idea. It does work. We can actually get through this. We have got full controls, we've got full support, and when we leave one of these games, so for example, if we were to quit Half-Life 2, so by all accounts, if we now go to don't save, okay, it does come back to it eventually. I did want to sort out that whole shell thing with Explorer, but you get the idea. You get your games, all the controls work, you've got full accessibility to everything, even the internet and Steam. So if we want to launch a game that's running on Steam, Steam is running in offline mode in the background as DRM. So any game that I own on Steam that was working with Windows XP will work. Software works. It can be all done with a controller, you can use a mouse and keyboard if you want, But as it stands, in a similar vein to the Steam machine, you can take this 20-year-old hardware, it runs Windows XP, it can give you a front end that looks kind of like the Xbox 360 to be fair, which is very 2005, and it will just work for playing games. Which brings us to the final part. It's all well and good that this runs like a Steam machine. What kind of games can it actually play? Now, of course, with this sort of being the predecessor to the Steam machine, that type of format, just what are the full specifications of our Shuttle XPC? Well, this is the Glamour variant from a sort of around 2006 to 2007, specifically being the one based on AMD's AM2 platform, coming with an Athlon X2 5600, which is on the 65nm process Brisbane, I believe, which makes it more power efficient, and also means it runs at 2.9 GHz rather than the base 2.8, given that power efficiency and thermals seem to be quite crucial here, then it makes sense why they've gone with the no-shrink version of this processor, of which you do actually get 2 cores, 2 threads running at 2.9 GHz, which is plenty of power for the era we're talking about. Graphics card wise, it is certainly a bit of a squeeze given the case's dimensions, the limited power supply and the thermal constraints, but we do have a 7600 GT that I have resurrected and brought back to life by fitting a new fan and also giving it a bit of the oven treatment. I mean, it needed that, but with that daughter board attached on the back, this was much harder than I thought it would be. It's got 256 megabytes of VRAM, which is not a great deal by today's standards, but back for the Windows XP era should be more than enough. Paired with this, we do actually have 2GB of speedy 800MHz DDR2, and I've added a 120GB SSD in there just to install Windows XP onto. To be fair, on Windows XP you can use a hard drive which it has space for, and that wouldn't be a problem. The motherboard is a custom Shuttle AM2 board, it runs Windows XP Service Pack 3, utilising a custom XBMC front end controlled via direct input, which as you probably guessed, took me many hours to actually get working. But this is all working on Windows XP. This is something you could have done 20 years ago, and it would have been probably easier back then, when a lot of the information would have been much easier to find. Today you can pick up a unit like this for around 20 quid to £100 depending on condition. I've seen auctions go cheaper than this, but generally for an okay condition one like mine with a dying graphics card cost me about 50 quid, which I think was slightly lower because they sent me an offer on it because I was following it for a little while. These don't tend to sell very quickly. They are a very niche item, but they are very cool. Now, I have cut a lot out of this video. I have hours upon hours of footage which I was considering time-lapsing and talking over, but really we can just summarise it all here. We've taken this Shuttle PC, we've fixed it, and we've got it running Windows XP from the era it was built, around 2006. From there, we've got a custom front end, which we can control with a controller, or keyboard, or mouse, and use that to launch our game. So from the moment you turn this on, it will act in a similar vein to the Steam machine. It will just work, but it's running Windows XP in the background for all your games, applications, and programs. You can go online, that will work absolutely fine. You can launch Steam, which will work to some capacity. It's not going to work great, but it does work for offline DRM checks, and it does mean that you can use this as an offline media PC or online if you do want to do some online gaming, which I have actually done on the system. The main takeaway from this is, if you are going to do this, be prepared, because it is a lot harder to do it today when lots of the information about this has been scattered around, and you are going to have to making your own Python scripts, XML files, custom dashboard files, just to get this to all work seamlessly together. Then again, I wanted it to be a polished experience. We have got it to a stage where this can be plugged into a telly, you can use an original Xbox controller, and that will do all of your gaming across a variety of Windows XP era titles. It will run Steam, in a similar vein to the Steam machine actually, just it is going to be running an older version from around 2018, which is only allowed to communicate with the servers once, utilising certificates that we've nicked from a Windows 11 machine to allow it to say, yes, you own these games. That's primarily why Steam is on here. So yeah, this can be done, this does work, and it is actually a rather seamless experience. I was actually pretty proud of myself when I turned it on for the first time. I replaced all of the shell files so that there is no Explorer running in the background until after XBMC is actually running, so you don't ever really see the start bar unless you close a game where it will quickly bring that front end back up, so you only see it for a brief second. Most of the time you are looking at something that is very similar to that of an Xbox 360's early dashboard. So yeah, this pretty much is a 2006 version of what the Steam Machine could have been, and they do older versions than this. If I really wanted to, we could probably try and pull something off on Windows 2000 if people were really interested. But there is one final area to talk about. We've seen that the experience is that of a media PC or Steam Machine-like device, but the main thing people are buying a Steam Machine for, outside the nifty concept, which is kind of what this is, a nifty concept, is it can do some gaming. But the thing is, this Shuttle PC specifications do indicate that for its era, this thing's actually a little bit overkill for Windows XP gaming, but where exactly are our limits? I mean, I've showed you a little bit of Half-Life 2, but I didn't go into the settings, the resolutions, or how it was actually running with frame rates. So why don't we take this Windows XP Steam Machine experience and find out just where it places itself, what games can it run, and what can it sort of achieve at its latest. And the only way to do that is going to be taking this PC and throwing it up into the benchmarks. Starting off the benchmarks relatively easy, we have Halo Combat Evolved, running with very high settings, anisotropic filtering and anti-aliasing in 1024x768. We achieved 89 frames per second on average, with 1% lows down to 69 frames per second, which really is going above and beyond the levels of playability. Generally, you're talking over a 60 frames per second experience most of the time, even when in heavy combat, although it is worth noting during the more intensive area of the place we benchmark, there were a couple of frame drops in places, which were primarily to do with there being lots of particle effects going on. So the 7600 GT is powerful, the Halo Combat Evolved can still be very demanding in places. At the end of the day, when you're looking at these sort of early original Xbox titles, you're going to be seeing higher resolutions, higher settings, and double to triple the frame rate, especially when you factor in that you're not going to be seeing single digits in certain places. Next up, we have a little bit of Morrowind, which we ran with a medium draw distance, which is how the game defaulted itself to, with pixel shaders enabled in 1024x768. We did also have 2x anti-aliasing and 8x anisotropic filtering running through the drivers, and returned 52 frames per second on average, and 1% lows down to 44 frames per second. It's worth noting that these figures are taken during busier areas, as most of the time when you're not actually in towns and cities, you'll be seeing well over 60 frames per second, often verging in and around 100 FPS. It's worth noting caves were actually likelier to go higher than this, sometimes hitting 150 frames per second when not much was going on. Really, at this stage, you could probably turn up the draw distance without all too many problems, and given that Morrowind is quite single-thread dependent, the Athlon with both cores there, one running the background tasks and one running the game, had plenty to give. So in most instances, we were limited by the graphics card, but then again, when you weren't in busy areas, you could definitely handle higher settings. Now, one area the form factor probably does seem very interesting. I mean, I'm mostly looking at it from a under the table being connected up to the TV experience, but really, if you were looking for a classic LAN party style device, then this is almost perfect. Unreal 2003 here, running with ultra settings in 1024x768, return us 139 frames per second on average, and 1% lows down to 104 FPS. So yes, it is a remarkably competitive machine, but I wouldn't recommend trying to play this with a controller. I did set it up for joystick mapping and direct input, so you could actually sit there and play this with a controller at the telly, but you're not going to be playing it very well. Definitely something I'd recommend a mouse and keyboard for. But still, even in terms of actually a modern purchasing reason, if you're looking for a capable Windows XP machine for these older, more competitive titles, then yeah, you'll be able to max them out and get over 100 FPS. They're going to look great and they're going to run great too. Counter-Strike 1.6, in the form of the sketchy version Counter-Strike 16 we found online, did run absolutely fine with high settings in 1024x768. The game does utilise a 60 frames per second cap, being part of the gold source engine that's definitely been modified to some capacity by whoever's changed it from then Counter-Strike to Counter-Strike 16, but still, averages of 60 FPS, 1% lows down to 59 FPS. I have tried uncapping it before in the past and using different renderers, but I've never really had any luck. It doesn't really matter if you're looking at running it with OpenGL like we are here, or move into DirectX, you get in and around the same locked 60 frames per second experience. And yes, it will go online and it will work, and it does work with the controller, once again in a similar vein to Unreal 2003. Please don't, because it's not a great experience. But I was able to play online, I was chatting with people, and by chatting I mean I was just telling them I was using a Shuttle XPC from 2006, and only amassed 1 kill throughout the entire round. So yeah, Counter-Strike 16 works fine. We always have to get some sort of city builder in the benchmarks, and this I did actually map controller support into. It is downright unplayable even with it in, but still with high settings in 1024x768, provided you're playing with a mouse and keyboard, is actually a great experience. Given that we can have native 1024x768 support, we're not going to be running into driver conflicts or anything like that. You just double click the .exe file, set it up to the maximum settings and it'll work fine. We saw a pretty much locked 60 frames per second, with 1% lows down to 54. Now of course zooming in would cause a momentary stutter, speeding up would of course bring down the frame rate ever so slightly, but generally I got around probably about 15 minutes of gameplay because I always get caught up with these city builders. So yeah, if you're looking for something to play the older classic titles on, one of these Shuttle XPCs actually works really good for it. Once again though, will work with a controller, please don't try and do it. Now Half-Life 2, we have seen a little bit of it before, but what exactly were we getting in terms of frame rate? Well, with high settings in 16x anisotropic filtering with 1024x768, we returned 67 FPS on average, and 1% lows down to 53. Now I know Half-Life 2 was actually developed with the original Xbox considered as a console port, one that did actually come out, and you can pretty much mimic the mapping for the original Xbox for a Windows XP computer. In fact, I would be willing to say this is one of the best experiences we had with the machine because it does work so well with direct inputs. Now, if we were running Windows 7, we could have X input and it'd work even better, but at the same time, we're talking about the original 2004 release just running on an original Windows XP system through a front end, and it was controllable, it worked well, and there were no problems. So Half-Life 2, you get great visuals, great frame rates, and good controller support, which is actually quite important given what we were setting out to do. Another title from in and around the sort of Half-Life 2 era was Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, which can be a little bit more intensive, especially with some of the particle effects and the quality of the textures in this game, which you often forget when you start playing it at high settings are really nice. I'm currently playing it through using backwards compatibility on the Xbox One X, and I do have to say, it isn't a patch on playing it on PC with the high settings, anisotropic filtering turned on, and a nice 1024x768 resolution. The quality of the textures and the quality of effects are remarkably higher than that of an original Xbox, even when it's upscaled on newer consoles, and it's nice to have a 65 frames per second frame rate and 1% lows down to 49 FPS. So Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, you're not really going to run into any problems with it, and you can also leave the frame rate uncapped without all too many problems. When you start moving to newer operating systems, it doesn't work great, and we were able to get some form of controller support. Now, Knights of the Old Republic doesn't really have any official controller support. That wasn't added until the engine remake for KOTOR 2, which still hasn't come to KOTOR 1, by the way. And anyway, I'm going off on a tangent here, but we were able to map coordinates where the menus are, meaning that we could actually launch it and play it through with a controller despite having no dedicated support whatsoever. Moving towards the crisis before crisis existed with Far Cry 1, which defaulted to high and very high settings on the machine. It does a little scan of your computer and says this is how you should run the game. And I went through and thought, yeah, we'll give it a go, we'll see if it does slow down, because sometimes it gets it wrong. But with high and very high settings in 1024x768 utilising DirectX 9, no need for OpenGL for compatibility here. The 7600 GT just works perfectly, as does controller support. It's a first-person shooter that came out, well, it had a port to the original Xbox, which does mean that you do get some degree of support for direct input, and you can map the controls quite easily. In a similar vein to Half-Life 2, you could easily get into the game with the front end of the controller, which was quite nice to see. But still, how was the performance? We saw averages of 66 frames per second, and 1% lows down to 53 FPS, with once again particle effects and explosions bring us down to the mid-40s. It pretty much ran the exact same as Half-Life 2. That is my main takeaway here in terms of controller support and graphics. Yeah, this was another big winner. You can't test a Windows XP machine without of course testing Fable Lost Chapters, which is very optimized but can also be very intensive in certain scenarios, both on the processor and the graphics card. It's worth noting that the PC port doesn't actually retain any of the Xbox controls, that were native to the original Xbox. They are there and they do work for certain things, but usually it's not enough to control the game. However, there is a mod out which we could just implement which does add full controller support. The only difficulty would then be porting that to direct input rather than using X input like how the mod is currently set up. Really, I did have a couple of scripts running so we could control it with the controller, just basic things like WASD mapped to the thumbstick and bits and pieces like that. It was quite a lazy one doing this, I just wanted to show that it could be controlled. But still, Fable the Lost Chapters did work, very high settings, 1024x768, 53 FPS on average, 1% lows down to 44, which it often hit in busy areas, which was down to both the processor and the graphics card, but ultimately a great experience, but one that controller support is certainly iffy. But finally, can a Windows XP style Steam machine run Crysis? Well, it can with low and medium settings in 800x600. The few medium settings that were enabled didn't seem to have any real performance hits, so I put them on to try and save face for the visuals, but let's be honest, Crysis running DirectX 9 with low settings is not a pretty sight. However, this game came out a good few years after this system existed, so I wasn't exactly expecting the best out of it. But still, we did return above 30 FPS on average, with averages of 31 frames per second, 1% lows down to 23 FPS, and it pains me to say this, Crysis does actually have decent direct input support, which means that you can actually map controls quite easily and play Crysis, admittedly not exactly with the greatest frame rate or visuals, on a Windows XP Shuttle machine. So Crysis, it's not the best experience, but hey, it goes to show that the PC will struggle, but it can still run some of those later titles. Given that we had Steam on here and I had an old version of GTA 4 set up to work with it as DRM, this is sort of my argument for why this is the Windows XP Steam machine. This is a Steam title that is running on this PC, which is running Windows XP, utilizing it as DRM, and well, it wasn't playable. I mean, low settings in 800x600 wasn't exactly great for visuals, but more so than this, I could have updated the drivers, but when I did try, it just netted us worse performance, but slightly less broken visuals, so I thought, what's the point? I'll show you this original capture anyway. We returned 20 frames per second with broken visuals, 1% lows down to 13 FPS, but hey, we were able to launch it. We're utilizing Steam as DRM, it was launched via the front end, controller support does actually somehow work here. I mean, makes sense, it is X input, but you can sort of get direct input working as well. So yeah, GTA 4 on Windows XP, still utilizing the Steam DRM in 2026. Yeah, this thing was ahead of its time, because it's still able to do it. I mean, it's not playable, but it can sort of do it. So as a gaming machine, you know what, I'm actually going to say this was far more competent than I was really expecting. I mean, let's be honest, we sort of knew it would manage those early Windows XP sort of original Xbox titles fine. Halo Combat Evolved, you're talking in around 100 FPS in places with no problems. The same extends to Morrowind, Unreal, a lot of those classic LAN titles up to Counter-Strike 1.6 and Source, you're going to be getting no problems whatsoever. I mean, I ran Counter-Strike 16, which was a weird pirated copy just because although we have Steam on here, we can't communicate with the Steam servers for online gameplay, so it made more sense to use this very sketchy rehosted and repackaged version called Counter-Strike 16. I mean, even as far as sort of those later, more intensive titles, you're talking 60 frames per second in Knights of the Old Republic, you're talking 60 frames per second in Far Cry 1 pretty much maxed out, and the same again for Fable the Lost Chapters where, okay, it's not hitting a constant 60 FPS, but it's getting very close to it. The issue is, when you start getting into those later XP era titles, I mean, Crysis, we were able to have a couple of medium settings enabled without too much of a performance hit, and during intensive sections of the game it was bouncing between 20 to 30 frames per second, but hey, we do have Crysis, one of the more intensive games out there that is actually newer than this PC is, running at around 30 frames per second, which is admirable, especially when you consider the form factor and the fact this was a dying graphics card. To be fair, it didn't artifact after I fixed it, so I'm calling that at least temporarily bodged into life. Where you start really coming into problems is the Xbox 360 generation, which is, despite the dashboard I've put on here, I mean, when you start getting into titles like GTA 4, which to be fair is very intensive in the Windows port, it is not easy to run even on hardware of its era. We're talking low settings that don't work quite right at anywhere from sort of 13 to 25 frames per second, sometimes more if you're in cutscenes. So for those Windows XP games, something that would have been around during this PC's era, it's perfect. It is doing exactly what the Steam Machine is doing today. It is playing games of its era perfectly fine. How it deals with titles after that, well, I wouldn't be surprised if it goes a similar way to this, where it'll manage them, but lower settings are going to be required until eventually you hit the stage where it's just not going to be very happy. And we're doing all of this without any modern operating system, we're just using Windows XP. So how would I rate the user experience? I mean, the Steam Machine is arguably more polished. I've used Steam Big Picture a lot since its release, I've seen how it's improved, and to be fair, for most people, you haven't even got to really worry about Steam Machine. If you can run a modern version of Steam, just load up Big Picture on your computer, connect it to a telly, it just works. I've not really run into any problems with it. In fact, I've run into more issues with the Windows 11 game bar conflicting with my controls for Steam Big Picture, which isn't even really their fault. But to be fair, trying to recreate a similar experience of being a games launcher and essentially the hub for everything, yeah, it does actually work. I spent a lot of time dealing with custom direct input controls for both the actual mappings in XBMC and also around Windows and application-specific titles. So when we are outside of XBMC and we shouldn't have controller support, we can actually ping ourselves to the window and we can go through dialog boxes, close out of games, and control the mouse with the controller. I mean, you can just use a mouse and keyboard, which is far easier, but as it stands, we were able to recreate the full controllable desktop experience using a controller with no problems. Is it clunky? Yes, in certain places it is, because acceleration could be certainly funny if resolution changes were involved, but there wasn't ever once an instance where I wasn't able to get myself back to the dashboard and had to resort to using a mouse and keyboard. We just didn't have to do it because I spent so much time getting the controller working. There are so many scripts running in the background with little processes that I don't doubt that in some of those later titles we were losing 1 or 2 frames per second from the amount of processing Windows was having to do for my controller inputs. But hey, it does actually work. Direct input can be described as the devil when you're used to dealing with X input after all of these years. You plug it in and it works. Here, it was all very manual, very painful, but you know what? As an actual user experience, you could plug this in under your telly. It's not going to match a console, it's not going to match the Steam Machine, but for hardware that's 20 years old, using an operating system that no one really touches anymore, you can still pull it off. So there we have it, the Windows XP Steam Machine experience. And you know what I find most fascinating about all of this? Is the fact that nothing ever really changes. I mean, sure, the Steam Machine is more polished, it runs Linux, it's using custom hardware, but the fact is, Shuttle, I've got to give them credit, especially for their customer support, and we've seen one of their PCs pop up on this channel before. The fact they were pulling off a similar form factor, entirely custom, using hardware that has IDE cables and very limited space, you know what, you've got to give them credit, because this thing, the loudest part in it was the graphics card. And that was primarily my fault for fitting a bigger fan, but I didn't want it to overheat and cook itself again. But other than that, this thing was pretty silent. It works really, really quickly in an operating system of its era. And the bit that I find most fascinating about all of this is how nothing ever really changes. I mean, we looked at this sort of similarly a while ago with the Steam Deck, where we came across Samsung's interpretation of it from the Windows XP era. It doesn't matter what ideas exist today, someone has been trying to pull them off 20 years ago, and I wouldn't be surprised if they were dreaming of it 20 years before that. The fact is, 20 years ago is the Windows XP era, and sure it's clunky, sure it's old, but they damn well managed to pull off exactly the same experience as we are getting today. Yes, the hardware's limited, yes, the form factor isn't as perfect, yes, it is downright painful to get it to where you want it to be, but at the same time, it's got the features. You've got digital output, you've got analog output, you've got surround sound output, you've got front-loading USB. I mean, we actually have a DVD drive. There aren't many mini PCs out there, I don't think there's any, that come with a DVD drive. And the fact is, it runs Windows XP. I love dealing with a bit of Windows XP, even if it is unbelievably painful when we're trying to do something like this. So I hope you've all enjoyed this video. I know that it's been a bit of a weird one because there was a lot covered in that first section of the video, because I had to cut out so much troubleshooting, because otherwise you would just be looking at me repairing parts and trying to deal with XML files and dealing with scripts for the controller in the background, which ultimately didn't amount to much. I mean, it was just so we could get the experience we wanted. But anyway, this video has been, 1, a bit expensive getting a hold of the hardware, and then 2, very, very time consuming, but I've had a lot of fun doing it. So I hope you all enjoyed watching. Thank you very much for watching, and good night.